Millionaire reunites with ex-wife working at a hotel and is shocked to learn he has 2 children. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? And if you love love stories filled with emotional twists, make sure you subscribe to the channel. It really helps the channel grow and motivates me to bring more heartwarming stories to you. Eliza Hartman leaned her head on Logan's shoulder as the car moved through the charming old streets of Charleston, South Carolina. It was a warm spring afternoon, and the sun softly gilded the historic rooftops. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was peaceful, almost magical. She wore a simple white dress, lace detailing at the shoulders, and a delicate veil pinned to her auburn hair, styled loosely into a bun. Her pale gray eyes shone not from excitement, but from gratitude. Logan Wycliffe, behind the wheel, kept one hand steady on the steering wheel while gently squeezing her fingers with the other. Tall and elegant, he wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit. His wavy dark blonde hair was immaculate, and his grayish-green eyes softened each time they met hers. "Do you still think this was crazy?" he asked with a sideways smile. She softly laughed. "A little, but it's the most beautiful madness I've ever lived." It was true. The marriage hadn't been impulsive, but it hadn't been conventional either. They had known each other for nearly 10 years. Eliza had a modest childhood, raised by an aunt who was a seamstress after losing her parents very young. Logan, on the other hand, was the heir of one of the most influential families in the hotel industry. And even coming from such different worlds, something between them always remained pure and inexplicably strong. It started as friendship, then admiration, until, amid the loneliness of the pandemic, they realized the love they shared was more than just companionship. Logan cupped her face as they reached the door of their hotel suite, where they'd spend their wedding night. "You know I love you, right?" he whispered softly but firmly. Eliza smiled with tears in her eyes. "I do. And I love you too." They kissed gently, and that night, more than a contract or a ring, a true bond of affection connected them. Logan treated her tenderly, and for the first time in a very long while, Eliza felt safe. The next morning, as they had coffee on their room's balcony, wrapped in white sheets with the sound of seagulls in the background, Eliza rested her head against his chest. "Have you ever imagined yourself as a father?" she asked suddenly. Logan was quiet for a few seconds. She lifted her face to see his expression. He stroked her hair and answered honestly, "No, never imagined it. Not even when I was a kid." She waited silently. "It's just, I don't feel that calling. I can't picture myself caring for someone who depends completely on me. I don't have that inside of me, Eliza." She stared at him, trying to process it. "You've never wanted children?" "No, and I thought you knew that. I thought that ... Maybe, with me, you'd change your mind." Logan closed his eyes tightly, feeling guilty but unable to lie. "Eliza, what I feel for you is real. You're the only woman I've ever truly loved. But this, being a father, it's just not in my heart." Eliza stood slowly, wrapping the sheet around herself, and walked to the window. A gentle breeze moved the white curtains, and the scent of coffee lingered in the air. At that moment, something inside her started to break. She loved him. He loved her. But between them grew a silence, the silence of a future without children, without cuddles, without emotional legacy. She didn't cry. "Not yet. So, that's it?" she whispered. Logan approached from behind, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his face on her shoulder. "That doesn't mean I don't want to build a life with you. I just need you to accept me like this." Eliza nodded slowly. But something inside told her that this request would cost far more than he imagined. And just like that, what should have been the beginning of a home filled with plans turned into An invisible agreement, silent yet cruel. A marriage sustained by love, but also by amputated hope. In the days that followed, Eliza tried to maintain the routine as if nothing had changed. She prepared breakfast with the same gentleness as always, arranged fresh flowers in the center of the dining table, and smiled at social events by Logan's side, the husband, who loved her but couldn't see her pain. She never brought up the subject. Again, she never insisted. Instead, she tucked away her dream of motherhood, burying it like a precious keepsake hidden deep in a drawer she could never open again. At gala dinners, Logan delivered speeches about investments and sustainability, always impeccable, his hand resting lightly on her back. Everyone said they were the perfect couple, but no one noticed the silent way Eliza watched other people's children, or how her eyes wandered in the parks, observing children chasing bubbles. She smiled at them, but her eyes grew dim. One morning, while walking alone through the tree-lined streets of their neighborhood, she passed by a school. Stopping in front of the iron fence, she saw a little blond boy with a blue backpack kissing his mother's cheek goodbye. The woman, dressed simply, hugged him tightly, as if that moment was everything. Eliza's eyes filled with tears, her chest burning. She leaned against the fence, motionless, as if something inside her was imploding. "I wanted this," she whispered softly to herself. "I've always wanted this." She returned home quietly. Logan was in the meeting room, talking on the phone with some investor from Texas. When he saw her, he just waved with a quick smile and pointed to his watch as if saying, "See you at dinner." She climbed the stairs slowly, as if carrying an invisible weight on her shoulders. Entering their bedroom, she opened the wardrobe and stared at their neatly arranged clothes, his, always dark and elegant. Hers, soft and subtle. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands for several minutes. Then she stood up and began carefully folding her clothes. No rush, no tears. She packed her bags with the same silence she had lived in for the past months. She wrote the note on a page from an old notebook she used to jot down recipes. Her handwriting was steady, even though her fingers trembled slightly. "You didn't want a family. I didn't know how to live without hope of having one." She left the note on his pillow. Before leaving, she walked through the house one last time. She touched the doorframe in the kitchen, where she'd imagined countless times a child asking for more pancakes. She took a deep breath. She gently closed the front door behind her. Outside, the city carried on as usual. Cars drove by. Sunlight warmed the sidewalks, and the world kept turning indifferent to the quiet departure of a woman who had ceased to exist inside herself. Eliza didn't look back, because she knew if she did, she wouldn't have the strength to keep moving forward. And at that very moment, upstairs, Logan ended a business call, still believing he had plenty of time. Time for dinners. Time for projects. Time for a love he thought was safe, but what he didn't know was that love sometimes leaves, and sometimes it doesn't come back. The bus swayed gently as Eliza kept her eyes fixed on the city's gray landscape. Charleston seemed colder that day, even as the sun pierced timidly through the clouds. Her hair hung loose, tucked only behind her ears. She wore a worn gray coat and old canvas sneakers. Her face, once glowing from her comfortable life with Logan, was now pale, marked by exhaustion and sleepless nights. She got off 2 blocks early, as she always did. She enjoyed the walk to the shelter. It made her feel alive, as if something still lay ahead, even though everything inside her was frozen. The Hope House shelter operated out of an old school renovated through donations. It was modest, with narrow hallways and walls painted a pale yellow, decorated with faded children's drawings. Children rescued from harsh situations lived there. Neglect, abuse, abandonment, little fragments of humanity trying to survive with what was left. Eliza arrived early. She pinned on her handwritten name tag crookedly and headed straight to the playroom. The other volunteers were already tidying up books, dolls, and scattered games. As she picked up puzzle pieces, she felt someone watching her. It was always the same pair of eyes, clear, large, quiet, observing her from the corner. The little boy was sitting near a shelf filled with stuffed animals, knees drawn up to his chest. His unevenly cut ash blonde hair fell into his eyes. His skin was very pale, almost translucent, and his thin frame looked like the world had never given him enough to properly grow. His name was Micah. He was 4 years old, and he spoke to no one. Eliza didn't force him. She simply smiled from afar every day, offered him toys, and left drawings on his little table. Sometimes she sang quietly, just so he'd know she was there, but Micah never reacted. He just watched. Always. In the third week, something different happened. Eliza sat on the playroom floor, reading a children's book about animals. It was a simple story with short words, but her voice carried a quiet calmness, like someone planting seeds in dry soil. She felt a gentle touch on her leg. When she looked down, Micah was there, standing, leaning against her left leg. His tiny arms hugged her with a fragile strength, unsure if she'd allow it. Eliza froze for a moment, then slowly ran her fingers through his hair. Micah rested his face against her thigh, and in a whisper so faint it nearly vanished beneath the noise of the rain outside, he asked, "Are you going to leave me too?" His words cut her like a knife. Eliza swallowed hard. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she lowered herself to his height, gently cupped his small face, and looked directly into his eyes. "No, Micah, I'm not going anywhere." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of her tiny rented room. For the first time since she'd left, something burned within her with renewed purpose, as if her pain had finally found direction. Over the following weeks, she grew closer to the boy. He started following her everywhere around the shelter. He held her hand tightly during meals. He fell asleep in her lap on colder afternoons. The social workers noticed the bond, and after many conversations, they handed Eliza a form. "Are you sure about this?" they asked. She held the paper with trembling hands, but her gaze was steady. "Micah doesn't need a caretaker. He needs someone who stays. I want to be that person." That day, as she signed the document with a borrowed blue pen, Eliza felt herself being reborn, not as a wife, not as a daughter, but as a mother. She didn't know what would come next or how she'd provide for both of them. But for the first time in a long while, she felt exactly where she needed to be. And as she cradled Micah in her arms one chilly afternoon, with the scent of soup in the air, she whispered softly into his ear, "You saved me first, Micah. Now it's my turn to save you." She didn't know it yet, but she was about to discover that love born from abandonment is the strongest of all. And that bonds not made by blood can be eternal. The autumn leaves already covered Charleston's sidewalks when Eliza began to realize that something inside her had changed. It wasn't sadness nor fear. It was something deeper, quieter, invading her days with constant fatigue, morning nausea, and a strange intuition she tried to ignore. Eliza had faced difficult months. She volunteered at the shelter in the morning, cleaned houses in the afternoon, and at night, cooked dinner for Micah, who now slept beside her mattress, his tiny body wrapped in a blue blanket she'd bought at a thrift store. That evening, while preparing pasta with canned sauce, the smell of spices suddenly made her stomach churn. Dropping the spoon, she ran to the bathroom and knelt beside the toilet, feeling her stomach rebel. Afterwards, she sat on the cold, white-tiled floor, leaning her head against the wall, her face pale and sweaty. Her breathing was shaky, and something inside her finally found the courage to speak, "No, it can't be." The next day, She asked her neighbor to watch Micah for a few hours. She took the bus to the community clinic, sitting in the back row, hands crossed tightly in her lap. The trip felt longer than ever. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and old paper. Women with children in their arms, distracted teenagers, and tired mothers filled the seats. When the nurse called her name, Eliza's body froze for a moment before she stood up. The doctor was kind, an older black woman with short hair and a reassuring smile. She examined Eliza, asked a few simple questions, and ordered a blood test. Minutes later, she returned with the results. "Congratulations, Eliza, you're pregnant." According to the calculations, about 10 weeks along. The world seemed to shrink. Eliza stared at the floor for a few seconds, then slowly raised her eyes. "Are you sure?" The doctor smiled gently. "Yes. Would you like a printed copy of the results?" She nodded silently. Back on the street, Eliza sat down on a wooden bench in front of the clinic. Her hands trembled as she held the envelope containing the test. The sky was gray, the air slightly damp, and a cold wind played with strands of her loose hair. Slowly, she unfolded the paper and read the words confirming what her body already knew: pregnant with Logan's child. His name echoed in her mind. Like an icy current. She took a deep breath, watching children leave a nearby school. Some ran into their parents' arms. Others walked hand in hand with caregivers. A blonde girl with a pink backpack knelt down to tie her shoelace alone. Eliza's eyes tightened. "You said you never wanted to be a father," she whispered, her voice choked. "And I believed you." She thought about telling him. She considered picking up the phone and calling. But the memory of that night, when he'd spoken with absolute certainty that fatherhood wasn't part of his plans, cut deeply inside her. Micah was everything now. And so was the life growing within her. She placed her hand over her belly, which showed no signs yet, and spoke softly, with the firmness of a heartfelt promise. "My children won't be rejected by anyone." She stood up slowly, folded the test, and tucked it into her coat pocket. She knew life wouldn't be easy. She knew difficult days were ahead, overdue bills, sleepless nights, and silent judgments. But at that moment, more than ever, she felt whole. And somewhere else in Charleston, Logan Wycliffe was making another pitch to international investors, unaware that 2 small hearts now beat in the world because of him. But time relentless, and Wise would make sure the truth came back around, one way or another. The savings Eliza had carefully kept began to slip through her fingers like sand. Cleaning gigs and small donations from the shelter were no longer enough to cover the rent, Micah's medication, food, and prenatal exams. She started skipping meals, telling Micah she wasn't hungry when in reality, she just wanted him to eat enough. It was on a cloudy afternoon that she saw, taped to a bakery window, a job posting. Night shift cleaning staff needed, hotel. Bellevue. Bellevue was well known around town, a 5-star hotel with a neoclassical facade located just a few blocks from Charleston's historic center. Eliza hesitated for a few minutes in front of the sign, clutching her worn coat over her still discreet belly. Then she stepped inside, asked for the manager, and handed in her name along with an improvised, handwritten resume. 2 weeks later, she got the call. The salary was small but enough to survive. The uniform was dark gray with a white collar and rubber-soled shoes. The loose-fitting clothes helped conceal her 3-month pregnancy, and she quickly learned to tighten her apron belt strategically, disguising her growing belly. Her shift started at 6 in the evening. She left Micah with her neighbor, a retired woman who lived downstairs, and walked briskly and quietly to the hotel. At Bellevue, Eliza was just one more among many invisible women who cleaned elegant hallways, tidied up suites after extravagant parties, and picked up trays with forgotten champagne glasses. The lights in the grand lobby were tall and golden. The hallways were quiet and carpeted. Each floor had its own scent, controlled by diffusion systems, lavender for executive floors, subtle vanilla for luxury rooms. She pushed her cleaning cart gently, wearing disposable white gloves and avoiding any noise. She had already learned that the less noticeable she was, the better. While changing towels and vacuuming carpets worth more than 6 months of her rent, she thought about Micah and the baby growing inside her. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she paused for a second by a window on one of the upper floors, gazing at the city lights and feeling the small, subtle movements inside her womb. "You're not even born yet, but you're already teaching me resilience," she whispered. One night, while cleaning the bathroom in a presidential suite, she overheard a guest complaining on the phone. "I asked for a room facing the ocean, and they put me on the side. This place isn't worth what they're charging." If I were the investor they're trying to impress, I'd have laughed at their proposal. Eliza pretended not to hear. She continued polishing the mirror in circular movements as if erasing the words from its surface. In the staff locker room, she changed clothes silently. She rarely spoke. Her coworkers called her the quiet one or the elegant pregnant girl. She just gave a small smile. She knew nobody there cared about stories, just about survival. When her shift ended, she exited through the back, crossing a side alley and walking along darkened sidewalks until reaching home. The city lights were already fading. The world slept, but she was awake, exhausted, yet still standing. That night, as she lay down beside Micah, she felt the baby stir within her and whispered softly, "I don't have much, but I have you both, and for you, I'll keep going." What she didn't know was that the Bellevue was about to undergo a strategic renovation, and the new investor, already confirmed by economic newspapers, was a name she'd never expected to hear again. But fate has its own way of weaving reunions. In the hallways you least expect out, the Charleston sky was already tinted with shades of orange as Eliza entered Bellevue's main dining room, carrying a bucket of warm water and a cloth folded over her shoulder. It was late afternoon, the hotel's busiest hour. Lights dimmed softly, the restaurant bustling with executives and wealthy tourists, silverware clinking against expensive porcelain plates, waiters swiftly balancing trays, and muffled voices filling the room like a mist of elegance and power. She discreetly approached one of the tables in the corner, gently moving the chairs aside, wiping away crumbs and drops of red wine as if she didn't exist. She was used to being invisible. Her loose gray blouse hid her slightly rounded belly, and her hastily tied bun barely contained strands of auburn hair that fell around her face. Her back ached. Her legs felt heavy. Yet she pressed on. That's when she overheard the manager's nervous whisper behind her, "He's here." The new investor, Logan Wycliffe, heading straight to the VIP area. The name hit her like an avalanche. The sponge slipped from her hand and dropped to the floor. The bucket almost tipped over. Her heart raced as though all the air had suddenly left the room. Eliza felt her knees weaken. Logan. It had been months since she'd heard that name. She had buried it beneath layers of silence, along with memories of the love she'd sworn to leave behind. Eliza glanced around quickly, her mind racing. She had to get out, now. She hurried down the side hallway, the same one that led to the service exit. She knew exactly how to avoid guests, vanish between shifts, disappear entirely. She'd done it before. But as she rounded the corner leading to the emergency door, she abruptly froze. He was standing right there. Logan Wycliffe. He stood tall in a dark, tailored suit, his posture commanding, hair perfectly styled. Older, more serious, but with the same greenish-gray eyes that once knew every inch of her. There. Eyes met. Both froze in place. Everything around them disappeared. The kitchen noise, the clinking glasses, The hurried footsteps all faded into that silent exchange, heavy with the past, with unspoken words, with wounds that had never healed. Logan took a hesitant step forward as if seeing a ghost. "Eliza?" His voice came out quiet, disbelieving. She didn't respond. She stood firm, even as she felt her blood heat beneath her skin, even as her heartbeat echoed deafeningly in her ears. Then his eyes slowly dropped, searching, confirming what instinct already screamed at him. And there, beneath her plain uniform, he saw it. The curve of her belly. Subtle, yet visible. Undeniable. Logan stood motionless. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. His wide eyes betrayed shock. Time seemed to stop. Eliza held his gaze firmly. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall there. Not in front of him. "Not again," she whispered softly, her voice strained. "Not here." And then she walked past him with measured steps, without turning her head, without looking back. Logan stayed frozen in place, as if he'd been pulled out of his own life, as if he'd just woken up from a dream or from an irreversible mistake. The end of her shift brought the accumulated exhaustion of days without rest. Eliza passed through Bellevue's service exit, shoulders bent and hands discreetly pressed against her lower back. Her belly no longer allowed quick movements. Her uniform felt tight, her body heavy, but her desire to reach Micah was greater. The sky was golden, bathed in afternoon sunlight. Damp sidewalks reflected the amber glow of the trees, while cars drove slowly along the main street. Eliza walked steadily, eyes focused on the building ahead, knowing Micah would be waiting by the neighbor's doorway as he did every day. It was the sweetest moment of her day. She didn't notice, however, the luxury black car parked on the opposite corner, windows down and a man in a dark suit leaning against it. Logan Wycliffe had been watching her since she exited the hotel's back door. He hadn't gone after her the previous day. He needed time to digest the shock, to piece together the woman he had known with the scene he'd witnessed. Eliza didn't notice him until a familiar voice interrupted her pace. "Are you going to run away again?" She stopped instantly. Turning slowly, she saw him standing there. Tall, elegant, his tie loosened and shirt sleeves rolled up. His gaze wasn't judgmental anymore. It held doubt, pain, urgency. "I'm not running away, Logan. I'm just going home." Before another silence could form between them, a small, familiar voice echoed down the sidewalk. "Mommy." Eliza immediately turned, crouching with a relieved smile. Micah ran toward her, backpack sliding off one shoulder, arms wide open. She embraced him tightly, breathing deeply as if she just found the center of the world again. Logan stood still. His eyes, previously fixed on Eliza, were now glued to the little boy with ash blonde hair and pale eyes like rain-slicked glass. The child clung naturally and securely to her neck, as if her embrace had always been his safe place. "Is he your son?" Logan asked quietly, without accusation. Just pure, raw surprise. Eliza stood slowly, Micah still gripping her hand. Shy, the boy hid behind her leg, noticing the presence of the stranger. "His name is Micah," she replied calmly. "I met him shortly after I left your house. He was at a shelter. He'd gone through things no child ever should. And something about him broke me inside. I adopted him, Logan. He's my son." Logan took a step forward. He looked at the boy with confusion, almost afraid to reveal any emotion. Then his eyes met Eliza's again, as if still seeking confirmation for what he already knew. "And the baby." Eliza hesitated for a moment. She squeezed Micah's fingers gently, feeling him watching silently, then took a deep breath. "I discovered I was pregnant a few weeks after I left. I thought about telling you. I swear I did, but then I remembered your words." Logan swallowed hard. You made it clear you never wanted to be a father, that it wasn't part of your life, and I respected that. I did what you asked, even if you didn't realize you were asking. But I thought it was fair that I made my own choice too. The silence between them was heavier than any loud argument they'd ever had. There was no turning back now. Yet Logan's gaze, once so confident, now seemed lost. Certainty had been replaced by something more human, more broken. He glanced at Micah one last time. And for the first time in a long while, he said nothing, because in that moment, he finally understood. He had built walls to protect himself from pain. But by doing so, he'd closed himself off from the one thing that might have healed him. Now right there before him were two small hearts that had continued beating even when his own had chosen not to listen. Micah still clung tightly to Eliza's hand, leaning against her as if wanting to shield her from any discomfort. His clear eyes watched Logan curiously, but also cautiously, an expression known only by children marked deeply by insecurity. Eliza gently stroked the boy's hair and softly said, "Go with Ms. Ruth, sweetheart. Mommy will be right there." Micah hesitated briefly, then nodded and walked toward the building steps where their neighbor waited. When he disappeared from view, Eliza slowly turned back to Logan. His gaze was locked on her, a blend of disbelief, shock, and something deeper, as if he were struggling to reconcile every version of her stored in his memory, and none matched. The woman he'd just met again. "Do you have any idea what it's like to suddenly see you and discover this?" he began, trying to keep control. "A son? A pregnancy? And you, working at a hotel?" Eliza stood firm. The wind blew her loose hair aside, but she didn't look away. Her voice was calm, yet piercing. "Logan, I left because I respected your choice. You told me clearly that you didn't want children. You said it plainly, and I believed you. I wasn't going to beg for space in the life of a man who had already decided there was no room for all of me." He ran a frustrated hand across his face. "But you could have reached out to me, given me a chance to what?" She interrupted, stepping forward. "To listen with the same coldness as before? To suggest raising a child as if managing a business deal? You left me no doubts, Logan. You didn't want to be a father. I simply took you seriously." The silence that followed was as heavy as a door locking shut. "And Micah?" he asked, trying to regain control of the conversation. "You just adopted him out of nowhere?" Eliza took a deep breath. The boy's name brought a different kind of pain, sweeter, more visceral. "He chose me. Logan." Amid the chaos, he looked at me and asked if I was going to leave him too. I saw in his eyes everything I was desperately trying to hide. Fear, loneliness, helplessness. I held him tight and promised he'd never feel alone again. Logan lowered his gaze, moved by the strength in her words. The sounds of traffic seemed distant, as though the world had slowed around them. "And the baby?" he finally asked, his voice lower. "Did you already know when you left?" "No, I found out a few weeks later. I was already gone, already with Micah. And I thought about telling you. I swear I did. But every time I remembered your face saying, 'I never wanted to be a father,' something inside me withdrew. Because I knew if you rejected this baby the way you rejected fatherhood itself, I could never forgive you or myself." Logan stared at the ground for a long moment. When he finally looked up, standing there before her, for the first time in many years, he cried, "Dot, it wasn't anger. It wasn't wounded pride. It was guilt. I thought I was being honest with you, Eliza, but deep down, I was just trying to protect myself, because being a father terrified me. I never learned how to care for anyone." She stepped closer, her eyes watery yet serene. "You decided for both of us, Logan. Now I'm deciding to protect my children from rejection. Any rejection." Her words hit him like a blow straight to the chest. He didn't respond. He just nodded slowly, silent. tears streaming down his cheeks. The man she'd known confident, calculating, always in control now stood, stripped of all his armor. Eliza glanced at him one last time before turning to leave, but something in Logan's eyes spoke a silent urgency, hinting that perhaps this wouldn't be the last time he saw her. Logan stood on the sidewalk long after Eliza had disappeared from view. He watched her silhouette fade between the buildings, shoulders straight, steps steady despite the weight of two hearts under her care. The sun was already setting, golden light reflecting off the windows of nearby buildings as if everything around him was falling silent along with his thoughts. In the days that followed, something inside Logan began to shift. A new discomfort took root, as though all the certainties he had relied on for years were slowly collapsing. He struggled to focus during meetings. Reports piled up on his desk, and for the first time in his career, he didn't feel the urge to control everything. For once, he just wanted to understand. On Friday afternoon, he parked once again in front of Eliza's building, not accompanied by security or assistants, but carrying a simple bag. Inside it was a small teddy bear and a pack of colored Play-Doh, things he'd never imagined buying in his life. Eliza saw him from the window and hesitated before going downstairs. When she opened the building's front door, he stood there, uncertain, looking like a boy unsure if he'd be welcomed. "I didn't come here to argue," he said, holding up the bag. "I came to see Micah if you'll let me." She studied his face, trying to gauge if this was real. Logan Wycliffe, with slightly messy hair and vulnerable eyes. She didn't recognize the man from the mansion anymore, but she also didn't recognize the man who had once been so cold. "He's drawing in his room. You can come up." Micah eyed him warily at first, keeping his distance. Logan spoke softly as he sat on the floor beside the small makeshift table, pulling the Play-Doh from the bag. "Do you like making dinosaurs? Because I'm terrible at it. Maybe you can teach me." The boy didn't answer, but after a few minutes, he reached for the green color and pushed it towards Logan. It was a start. On Saturday, Logan returned with a little storybook. On Sunday, he brought pancakes he'd attempted to make himself burn, uneven, but made with his own hands. The second time Micah saw him, the boy initially hid behind Eliza's legs, but then came forward and took his hand out by the end of the week. Logan knew Micah's favorite story, the name of his imaginary friend, and that he hated cookies dipped in milk. Eliza quietly observed from afar, without interfering. At night, when alone, she cried not out of sadness but disbelief. On a cloudy afternoon, Logan stayed to help with dinner. He was peeling potatoes, sleeves rolled up, while Micah drew at the kitchen table. "I had no idea it was like this," Logan said without lifting his eyes. "Like what?" Eliza asked, stirring the pot on the stove. "Being a father. I thought it was about providing things, protecting through rules. But now I see it's about being present, listening, not leaving." Eliza stayed quiet for a moment. Then, softly, she added, "And about trying, even when you don't know how." He smiled gently, eyes glistening. "I didn't know what being a father was until I saw you being a mother." Micah suddenly interrupted the silence. He placed his drawing on the table and said, sweetly but firmly, "Daddy, look what I made." Logan froze completely. So did Eliza. He looked first at the boy, then at Eliza. His eyes immediately filled with tears. The boy had called him Daddy. Logan hadn't asked for it, hadn't forced it. He was simply called. Eliza leaned against the counter, her hand covering her mouth as she tried to hold back her tears, but couldn't. They ran silently down her face, mingled with relief, pain, and a feeling she couldn't name. Micah came closer and tugged Logan's shirt. "Do you like it?" Logan knelt down, wrapped the boy in a tight embrace, and whispered, It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Eliza watched them, her heart beating slowly and deeply. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel afraid. But deep down, one question lingered, the one she didn't dare ask aloud. Would he stay? This time? Time moved differently after the night Micah called Logan Daddy. It was as if something silent had been restored, not an immediate bond, but the careful beginning of something profound. Logan didn't leave. He didn't run away. The next day he came back. And the following day too. Always with the same humble presence. Never invading Eliza's space, but showing he was there through small gestures. Fresh fruits, children's books, inexpensive toys, new words to teach the boy, and lingering glances that spoke everything he still didn't know how to say clearly. Eliza watched carefully, not because she doubted his change, but because she understood the value of stability for a child like Micah, and now for the baby growing inside her. Still, she couldn't deny something within Logan had changed. He was no longer the man afraid of love. He was now someone willing to learn love as if it were a new language, full of stumbles, silence, and sincerity. One rainy afternoon, Logan appeared with a large wet umbrella and a simple box in his hands. "This is for you," he said anxiously, handing it over. Eliza opened it slowly. Inside was an empty photo album and a silver pen. "I want us to fill this together, starting now. Every little piece of this new story." She didn't say a word. She just touched the album's cover gently. Understanding this gesture spoke louder than any words. Days later, Logan invited her to dinner at his home, not to impress, but to cook something simple and genuine. Dinner was modest. Pasta with sauce he tried hard not to burn, and a somewhat disorganized salad with lettuce spilling over the edges. But Eliza smiled through every moment. Micah helped by arranging napkins on the table as if it were an important mission. When everyone sat down, the boy said loudly, "We have to say thank you first." Eliza raised her eyebrows, surprised. Logan smiled. "He learned this with me yesterday," he said proudly. "He wanted to share our ritual." Micah closed his eyes, joined his hands, and said simply, "Thank you for dinner, and for my family." Eliza felt tears welling up. Under the table, Logan firmly took her hand. The following week, he took her to her prenatal appointment. Sitting beside her in the small white room, walls decorated with colorful posters of babies, Logan held her bag as if it were something precious. When the baby's heartbeat filled the room, he squeezed Eliza's hand tightly, unable to hide his tears. "It's real," he whispered. "He's really in there, growing." "She," corrected the doctor, smiling. "It's a little girl." Logan stared at Eliza in surprise, a huge smile spreading across his face. "A girl," he repeated, eyes shining. "I have a daughter." Outside the doctor's office, he stopped in front of the elevator and faced her. "Eliza, I need to tell you something very clearly. I don't want to just visit you both. I don't just want to occasionally see Micah and hold your hand during appointments. I want to be here fully, every day. I want to wake up beside you, take Micah to school, change diapers, mess up dinner, hear our daughter crying in the middle of the night, and share that silence with you." She looked at him calmly, eyes wet. "You sure about this, Logan? Because the last time you promised something, I ended up leaving with a note." He stepped closer, gently caressing her face, and replied, "I wasn't that man, not yet. But you taught me, not with words, but with courage. And now I'm ready, not to be perfect, but to stay." Even when it gets tough, she didn't answer with words. She just hugged him, and in that embrace, everything they had never been able to say was finally spoken. 3 weeks later, Eliza and Micah moved into Logan's house. His office was transformed into a bedroom, painted soft blue with luminous stars stuck to the ceiling. An old dresser became a makeshift changing table. Micah got his own bed, dinosaur-themed sheets, and a nightlight Logan chose himself. Gradually, Eliza reorganized the closets, routines, and even her heart. Their daughter was born on a spring night. Logan stayed by Eliza's side throughout the delivery, holding her hand, wiping her face gently, and crying openly when their daughter took her first breath. The baby was strong, with clear eyes and her mother's serene expression. Exhausted but wholehearted, Eliza held her close. Logan kissed her forehead softly and said, "You've given me everything I never knew I needed." Days later, all four were on the sofa. Micah cuddled in Logan's arms, the baby asleep in Eliza's embrace. Windows open, letting in a gentle breeze. It was a simple scene, but for those who had known abandonment, doubt, and fear, it was everything. In that moment, Eliza understood. Not every family is born perfect. Some begin in mistakes, loss, or pain. But when built on choice, respect, and love, they become stronger than any blood bond. Now tell me, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I really want to know how much this touched you. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share with someone who also loves stories like this, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming ones. Before you go, I've selected another touching story that will move your heart even more. You'll be amazed.